Roland led Edith into a wooden hut deep within the forest. Agatha was somewhat irritated, annoyed that Roland would bring people to disturb her while she was crafting the magic seals. Upon seeing the demon, limbs severed, lay flat on a long table, surrounded by various bottles and jars. Edith let out an incredulous gasp. She was more in shock than fear. Agatha was in the final stages of extracting its blood. Roland explained, "This is the greatest enemy humanity now faces. The war between them isn't about territory or wealth, it's about who gets to continue existing. The loser will be utterly annihilated." The weight of this information overwhelmed Edith. Roland continued slowly telling her that the church had concealed this story, but the demon's origins could be traced back 1,000 years. It's also known as the Divine War. Only after Roland and Edith departed did Agatha let out a sigh of relief. She felt her attitude towards Roland wasn't great. Perhaps she should be more courteous to Roland. Even with such thoughts, she still didn't like anyone but witches entering her workshop, especially when she was about to craft magic seals. Moreover, she didn't want anyone, even Roland, to know the methods of magic seal making. However, she realized that this secret would soon be impossible to keep. Just then, there was another knock outside the shed. This time, Anna and Manhwa entered. They were about to craft 4 types of magic seals. When the blue blood flowed through the coated tubing onto the stone of God punishment, the two blended, releasing a stream of bubbles. The stone melted like a burning candle. Anna carefully observed the transformation, and Agatha explained, magic can alter one's physical capability. Higher awakened witches have noticeably better physical qualities than ordinary witches, while those transcendent witches reach the pinnacle in this aspect. To enhance the magic seal's efficacy, the best magic seals always use the blood of powerful demons combined with the highest quality stone of God punishments. They soon reached the final step. Relying solely on demons is insufficient, Agatha calmly stated, a witch's contribution is also essential. Manhwa covered her mouth in shock. Agatha continued, the Federation stumbled upon this secret by chance. The blood of a witch, when mixed with that of a demon, can create a unique effect. It makes the melted stone of God punishment maintain a state. Even after a long period, its magical circuitry remains intact. The liquid in the first container settled and emitted a grayish glow, resembling blue wax after it was cooled. She then picked up a small knife from the table, making a cut on her hand. After collecting half a cup of her blood, she asked Manhwa to heal the wound for her. This was precisely why Agatha had chosen the two. Anna was the most adept learner among the witches in the Witches' Union, suitable to inherit this knowledge, while Manhwa, on the other hand, could alleviate her pain effectively. If it hadn't been for Roland showing her hope in defeating demons and his unbiased attitude toward witches, she would have preferred to bury the secrets of magic seal-making forever. Even within the Federation, the idea that witch blood could blend perfectly with demons was hard for most to accept. Even she had her doubts about the origin of witches when she first encountered this. Such confusion was detrimental to the Divine War. Therefore, the crafting of the magic seals was one of the closely guarded secrets within the Federation. Finally, Agatha poured the blood inside. The red blood flowed through the shallow trench, while the surrounding blue blood chunks wriggled, their edges blurring and merging into one another. Next, she infused the seal with magical energy. Both Anna and Manhwa watched in shock. It was almost like the magic seal was alive. The next step was to cut it and seal it with silver foil. Depending on the type of magic seal, the final steps are always different. Some needed cutting, while others didn't. It wasn't a 100% success rate either, but if it failed, the solution was simple: just pry out the stone and start over. Anna frowned, but it requires a lot more blood. Agatha nodded and responded, that's why, in Takara, demon blood is even more precious than a witch's. Agatha sighed and continued, back in the Federation, during experiments, if a witch's blood is wasted, no one cares. But if they lose demon's blood, reprimands and punishments are inevitable. While preparing the second batch of seals, As Agatha was about to make another cut, Anna stopped her. Anna proposed to use her blood this time. Anna pointed out that manhua could heal wounds but couldn't replenish blood. His Majesty once said that excessive blood loss could cause dizziness and even fainting. Just as Agatha was about to decline the offer, Anna suggested Agatha rest for 2 days before resuming her work. Telling her to consume more meat porridge and animal liver during this period would speed up recovery. Is this also what His Majesty said? Agatha asked. Anna nodded. Anna knew the purpose of Agatha choosing her as an assistant to learn the methods of magic seal making. She might as well handle these next 2 batches. Agatha remained silent for a moment, then nodded. Back in the castle, Edith took a while to process everything before finally speaking. Roland wouldn't have concocted such an unbelievable tale just to deceive her. She wondered if demons were truly that powerful? Roland nodded. Not only are demons individually powerful, but their numbers are also staggering. Roland's army can easily defeat Timothy's knights, but victory against demons is not guaranteed. They've been slowly growing in strength over the past 400 years. The key point is, there's no possibility of negotiating peace in this war. It won't end until one side is completely eradicated. Edith looked intently at Roland, questioning if Roland has a plan to share this news with the public. Roland shook his head and picked up his teacup. It's inevitable, but not now. Roland is uncertain about how his people would perceive this cold and terrifying enemy. Building their confidence will be a slow process. Edith understands that panic is more fearsome than any enemy. Her final question was about the timeline. How long do they have before this war starts? Roland was uncertain, 5 years, maybe less. No one knows the exact time the red moon will appear. War could break out at any moment. That's why Roland can't afford to methodically unify Greycastle at a leisurely pace. She didn't respond further but stood up from her seat and knelt down on one knee in a knight manner. Given the circumstances, the Khan family is willing to be at your command, Edith said. Your laws will be unhindered in the north, and your will shall be the only voice in the north. She paused. She also hoped that all Roland's promises could be fulfilled. It seemed that Edith was still thinking about the steam engine. Roland smiled, then suggesting that Edith's father might not agree to this. Moreover, how could the Khan family guarantee any of this? Without hesitation, she replied, she will guarantee it herself. Edith confidently said she was willing to stay here. If Roland wants more, her brother Cole could also stay. This would force her father to agree, regardless of his reluctance. Roland looked at the two of them. Thinking this was effectively holding them as hostages? That would be an obvious threat in the eyes of the Duke. Edith shook her head, placing her hand on her chest and saluting as if she were a knight. She requested to join the city hall, expressing a desire to witness the new world Roland was planning with her own eyes and to see if this so-called advanced civilization was truly as wonderful as Roland had described. After Edith left, what pleased Roland the most was Edith's oath of allegiance. Nothing was sweeter than more population and resources. If the North truly surrendered as she suggested, the territory he effectively controlled would more than double. If everything went smoothly, he might be able to achieve unification before the month of the demons arrived this year. Soon, Agatha entered the office. Roland said Agatha had worked very hard recently. He then questioned, did the process go smoothly? Agatha calmly stated that the first batch failed twice and Anna participated in part of the production. Agatha placed the end results on the desk and then left. Before leaving, she remarked, if Roland wants more magic seals to be made, please provide her with a spacious laboratory first, not a shabby shelter that looks like a stable. Roland cheerfully responded, he will have the mage tower constructed as soon as possible. Just after Agatha left the office, Nightingale peeked in from behind. Curious about the magic seals. Roland grinned, saying these are roughly equivalent to telephones, alarm systems, and cameras. Nightingale shook her head, not understanding a word Roland just said. Roland elaborated. These will be given to Thunder. One seal can help with long-distance communication, another can detect the presence of demons nearby to prevent ambushes, and another seal can assist Thunder with exploration. Roland felt a pang of regret, unable to join the fleet at sea and missing the spectacular yet airy seascapes. A thick fog rose on the sea, and a sailor shouted that they were now approaching a reef zone. Thunder commanded the sailors to lower the sails and proceed at a slow pace, alerting everyone to be on high vigilance. Molly asked Margaret if she could really find the witch they spoke about. Margaret nodded, certain that Joan would not ignore any sailing ship in danger. The last time Margaret saw Joan, her legs had already transformed into the shape of a fish's. However, that was all 10 years ago, and Margaret had no clear idea of her current state. Camilla pondered, if Joan has always been with the sea, then there's no need to worry about her not being able to survive on her awakening day. But since more than a decade has passed, is she really still in this sea area? Thunder walked over, assuring Camilla to trust their intelligence. Ever since Thunder knew Joan became a witch, he's been paying extra attention here. He was aware of some greedy merchants trying to catch her. Thunder blinked, but a shipwreck stopped them. He assured Camilla those guys wouldn't dare to lay a finger on her again. Camilla and Molly thanked Thunder for his help towards the witches. Just then, a sailor reported hearing singing from the northwest direction. Thunder shouted for everyone to be quiet. As everyone held their breath and listened intently, the ethereal and elusive singing gradually became clearer. It didn't come from all directions but firmly pointed in one direction. Just like a ray of light piercing through the dense fog, guiding the ship to a safe course. Thunder, Camilla, Molly, and Margaret boarded a small boat, with Molly's slime protecting the bottom of the boat, and sailed towards the singing. After awakening as a witch, Joan almost never showed her face, knowing that she could not be caught by others. Ships in danger could often only hear her singing, and very few people had seen her. Therefore, Thunder's plan was to have the ship stay in place, continuously attracting Joan's singing, while he, Margaret, and the witches took a small boat to find her by following the sound. After sailing in the thick fog for some time, Margaret suddenly saw a figure and couldn't help but shout out her name. The singing abruptly stopped. A woman was seen half floating on the water, looking at the people in the boat in surprise, seemingly at a loss. The boat approached the girl, and Margaret said to her, identifying herself as Margaret, and asked if she remembered her. The girl made intermittent cries while slowly retreating backward. Thunder explained that she could no longer speak and that they would need Camilla's help. Camilla nodded and placed her hand on Margaret's shoulder. In an instant, Joan's voice echoed in her mind. Margaret heard the girl ask if Margaret had brought them here to capture her. Margaret was about to say that wasn't the case when Camilla interrupted her, telling Margaret to speak directly in her mind, as heartfelt communication was more sincere. Margaret calmed herself and repeatedly thought about what she wanted to say. She asked the girl if she remembered saving Margaret's life and explained that she was there to seek her help this time. The girl slowly swam out from behind a rock, approaching the boat, and remembered Margaret. They used to spend time together. Margaret was excited, thinking that Camilla's abilities were truly miraculous. Suddenly, the girl withdrew her hand and asked fearfully who Camilla was. Margaret realized that her thoughts could be directly heard by Joan and quickly explained that Camilla was a witch just like Joan, and it was her ability that allowed them to hear each other's thoughts. The girl was still somewhat scared and asked if sailors were here to capture the witches. Margaret shook her head and explained that the church's power had been completely eradicated in the fjord, and now witches were settling in a slumbering isle. If Joan wanted to head over to Slumbering Isle, Margaret was willing to guide her. The girl recalled being attacked with harpoons by the merchant before, thinking those people were after the church's bounty on her. Margaret looked at her seriously and assured her that such things would never happen again because Thunder had taken care of everything. The girl also remembered this name, recognizing it as belonging to a distinguished explorer. The two talked for a long time, while Molly and Thunder whispered to each other, wishing they could hear what was being said. After a long time, Joan let out a soft cry sound, flicked her tail, and dived into the sea, leaving behind a series of ripples. How did it go? Thunder asked. Margaret turned around, slowly revealing a smile, saying Joan had agreed to their request. As the carriage entered the city of Dawn, the sounds around them suddenly became noisy. York couldn't help but lift the curtain to look outside. A woman's voice came from beside him, asking what his first impression of the Dawn capital was. York smiled and said that it was indeed the merchant capital. Even on the main roads, vendors were openly hawking their wares. If this was happening in Grey Castle, all of them would have been chased away by the guards. He added that only the fjords could compare to this place. Hearing this, the woman laughed a few times, saying that people in the fjords were just a bunch of porters dealing in goods, merely transporting goods from one place to another, selling them at a profit due to scarcity. There weren't many valuable goods that could be sold from the islands. After some thought, she concluded that perhaps only salted fish could bring in some money. York didn't say much, just continued along with the woman's words, praising her for being the most well-known merchant in the capital. She smiled slightly, reached out to put her hand on his shoulder, and said that Mr. Ambassador is also really good at something. York had given the woman a bottle of perfume from Grey Castle as a special product 2 days ago. It had taken him only 2 days to become very close with her, and with another bottle of perfume, he had won her favor. After one night, the two of them were inseparable. York then asked what the most popular business in Dawn City was. The woman whispered in York's ear that there were 2 types of goods that sold well in the capital. One was practical items that were needed most of the time, but not too common, such as crystal glasses, silver mirrors, perfumes, high-quality fabrics, and textiles. The other type was novelty items, which had no standard price and depended entirely on whether the buyer liked them or not. If York was interested, she was willing to take him to visit the top exhibitions. However, she also mentioned that recently there was a business that was even better than those. The woman, her name is Denise, paused for a moment and said, slave trade. York thought for a moment, knowing this was a common phenomenon. The female merchant explained that businesses without capital were always the most popular. When the Wolfheart Kingdom was occupied by the church, tens of thousands of refugees flooded in. As long as they were given some food, they could be recruited in droves and it would be profitable to sell them anywhere. The woman looked out of the window and said that she didn't quite like the feeling of buying and selling people as slaves, especially women. York wrapped his arms around her, telling her not to think about these things. A business like that did not mean it was risk-free. When those refugees turned into a mob, the slave traders would have a headache. Just as they were about to get intimate, the coachman mentioned that they had arrived at the royal district. York politely declined the woman's invitation to visit her home and got off the carriage. He thought to himself that since Denise was a married woman, and now that they were in her husband's territory, visiting her mansion would be a huge risk. If her husband found out, he could end up severely beaten. Seeing York getting off the carriage, Hill, who was following the merchant convoy, slowly approached. Hill, York's personal guard assigned by King Roland himself, came to his side and smiled, saying that York truly lived up to his reputation as the magic hand. Hill then asked what they had talked about over the past few days. York said they were just talking about businesses. Although Hill didn't seem like a powerful knight in York's eyes, he had reportedly made many contributions to King Roland. When asked about his plans, York said with pride, raise the national flag, submit the documents, and let them know that the ambassador from Grey Castle has arrived. A grand banquet was arranged in the royal palace's grand hall. This was the first time York had attended a banquet of such high standard. Of course, what attracted York's attention the most were the noble ladies mingling among the men. A young man, surrounded by a crowd, walked up to him. He was the host of the banquet, the first prince, Anpian Moa. York quickly performed a chest salute, and Anpian mentioned that he had read the letter of introduction and documents on behalf of the King of Grey Castle. However, he explained that his father was very ill, which was why he couldn't personally attend York, expressing his regrets. Anpian sighed, stating that this was already common knowledge in Dawn City. A month and a half ago, the king suddenly fainted during a banquet and had not fully recovered since. He could only stay awake for 2 to 3 hours each day, spending the rest of the time in a deep slumber. York thought for a moment. A month and a half was exactly the time it took him to travel from Grey Castle to here. He comforted Anpian, saying, "His Majesty will gradually get better." The prince managed to smile and told York to continue enjoying the banquet, before preparing to leave. Just then, York suddenly remembered his main purpose for being there and quickly mentioned the previous discussions about forming an alliance between the Kingdom of Dawn and Grey Castle. The prince simply stated that he was aware of the situation, but everything had to wait until his father was well again. Not long after, a familiar voice came from behind York. He was startled and turned around quickly, only to find that it was indeed Denise. She raised a glass of red wine and walked towards York with a smile. After the banquet, Otto, following the prince, puzzled, asked the prince why he didn't agree to the alliance immediately. Forming an alliance with Grey Castle was the king's intention, and with the church's power becoming increasingly oppressive, they shouldn't be fighting this battle alone. The prince did not turn around. Instead, he asked whether his father had sent Otto to find Timothy instead of Roland. Otto explained that their ally was meant to be the king of Grey Castle, and the message brought by the ambassador confirmed that Roland was indeed the new king. The prince raised his hand to interrupt Otto, telling him that he had his own plans and that Otto need not worry about this matter any longer. Otto raised his voice, arguing that for the sake of the kingdom's security, they needed someone to restrain the church. Anpian's voice involuntarily rose as he turned around and told Otto that he did not want to repeat himself, instructing Otto to stay out of this matter. Seeing the crown prince so resolute, Otto had no choice but to let it go. Just as he was about to turn away, the prince suddenly called out to him, asking Otto if they were friends. Otto fell silent for a moment before responding yes. Andrea, Belinda, Aro, and himself were all friends of the prince. Anpian then slowly asked if something were to happen to his father, the king, would Otto support him in becoming the new king? Otto fell silent for a moment before finally responding, yes. Otto returned from the palace, confused and disoriented. Ever since the king fell ill, Prince Anpian seemed to be greatly affected. Although he had somewhat recovered recently, his words and actions seemed different from before. To put it precisely, he felt like a stranger. As a childhood friend, Otto believed he understood the prince very well. Anpian was not the kind of person who would resort to unscrupulous measures for power. In fact, Otto sometimes felt that Anpian was somewhat naive and not suitable to be a king who could lead and make important decisions. Because of this, Otto planned to assist his friend in governing the state affairs with all his abilities, along with Belinda and Oro, once Anpian was crowned. The three families had always followed the king closely since the establishment of the Kingdom of Dawn. Therefore, he still answered yes without any hesitation. But Otto realized that Anpian didn't care about his answer. The prince asked out of a habit born from insecurity. And Otto hadn't considered this. End of the day, the three families were willing to support the royal family, but what if the prince didn't need their support? This thought troubled Otto as he contemplated the future of their friendship and the role he and the other families would play in the upcoming reign of Prince Anpian. Realizing this, Otto felt an increasing distance between himself and Anpian. He sighed, thinking that perhaps he should take the initiative to do something. Probably, he alone couldn't do anything. The three families must unite. Only by working together could they possibly find out the reason behind Anpian's actions. Otto didn't go straight home. Instead, he made his way to the Tokat family territory. Aro, taking off his sweaty headband and tossing his wooden sword to a servant, asked why Otto came to find him. Otto pulled Oro aside and shared his thoughts and plans. Oro shook his head. He understood that Anpian was the prince, the heir to the Kingdom of Dawn, and he wouldn't always be their friend. Oro said that they should assist the king only if he needs them, if not, they shouldn't pry into his affairs. Otto just then realized that Oro had already seen this coming. Otto tried his best to persuade, saying their three families had always followed the royal family. Oro laughed cynically and said, "Since Andrea's death, there have been only two of them, where is the third family?" Otto grabbed Oro's hand and told him Andrea is not dead. Oro stopped in his tracks, turned around, and almost pinned Otto to the wall with the force of his movement. Otto couldn't keep this secret any longer. He slowly revealed that he had personally seen Andrea with King Roland back in Grey Castle. Oro's eyes widened, asking if he meant they were together in a romantic sense. Otto bit his lip, saying he wasn't sure, but Andrea had become a witch, and only Roland at the time was willing to shelter a witch. Otto carefully recounted Andrea's experiences, watching the mixed emotions on Oro's face. Both of them had once believed without a doubt the story of the Quinn family saying Andrea's carriage fell off the cliff. After hearing everything, Oro sat down on the ground, his face filled with frustration as he pounded the floor. Otto continued, saying that this was why they needed to bring Prince Anpian back. Oro was obviously unclear about the connection between the two matters. Otto urged him to think it through. By putting the alliance between the two kingdoms on hold and refusing to give a reason, Anpian risked the failure of the plan set by the king to stand united against the church. If the church were to launch an attack, they would have to face it alone. If they attacked the Kingdom of Dawn first, Oro would lead the knights to battle. If Oro were to be defeated and die in battle, he would never see Andrea again. Oro thought about it and seemed to find some logic in Otto's words. However, he then asked why Otto thought he would definitely lose. Ignoring his friend's protests, Otto continued, if the church attacks Grey Castle first, Roland will have to face the invaders. If Roland loses and dies, Andrea will most likely die by his side. If she gets captured by the church, her fate will be even worse. But if the two kingdoms could support each other, making the church hesitant to make a move, neither of them would have to die on the battlefield. There would still be a chance for Oro to meet Andrea in the future. Otto asked the final question. Is the alliance important or not? At this realization, Oro finally understood. He stood up and their hands gripped tightly together. York dragged his tired yet invigorated body back home. As he pushed open the door to his bedroom, he was taken aback to find a person there, who had already lit the candles. In the flickering candlelight, he recognized that it was indeed Hill who had spoken. Hill explained that nighttime was the only time he could visit without attracting attention, and he had been very cautious in coming here, hoping that York would understand. Hill poured York a cup of tea and then started to explain the situation. A large number of refugees from Wolfheart Kingdom were flooding into the Kingdom of Dawn, presenting an excellent opportunity for recruitment. Hill hoped that York would start treating this as a business venture, focusing primarily on finding craftsmen, individuals who can read and write, and those with some sort of special skills. All the finances would be covered by the king. York was not very knowledgeable in this area, and besides, slave trading mainly occurred at the border between the two kingdoms. As an ambassador, it was not convenient for him to go there. Hill sat down and reassured York that he wouldn't need to leave, traders would bring the slaves here, and even though the price might be a bit higher, it would save the trouble of screening them. As for not knowing how to conduct business, he could seek help from Denise. She was a well-known noble merchant in the area, and transporting the refugees to Grey Castle wouldn't be a problem for her. York was surprised at how much Hill knew and asked if he had been to the Kingdom of Dawn before. Hill shook his head, explaining that he had gathered this information while York was spending quality time with Lady Denise. York looked at Hill with admiration, commenting that he never realized Hill was not only a skilled knight but also a shrewd businessman. Hill modestly replied that he was neither a knight nor a businessman, but his mission, entrusted to him by the king, was to ensure York's safety at crucial moments. He added with a smile that he was just an ordinary person from an acrobat team. Back in the city of Neverwinter, in the border town, officials and assistants from the municipal hall kept sending various documents and reports to Barav. Under normal circumstances, the busier the municipal hall's work, the happier Barav would feel. However, recently, the situation has become complicated. Just as his assistant left the documents on the desk and closed the door, Edith's voice rang in his ears. Barav groaned inwardly. This young lady had really come down here, and she wasn't even using formal language when addressing him. The king had arranged for Edith to work in the chief officer's office as an assistant, in order to learn about the structure of the municipal hall and the process of handling government affairs. However, it seemed she didn't see it that way. Seeing that Barav seemed overwhelmed, Edith offered to help him with a smile. Reluctantly, Barav nodded in agreement. Given her status as the daughter of the Duke of the Northern Territory, she was indeed of a higher rank than Barav. Even if he felt helpless inside, there was nothing wrong with Edith's words or actions. If Barav outright refused Edith's help and the king heard about it, it would be hard to justify his actions. At such a crucial time, Barav could not afford to leave a bad impression on the king. Soon, the sound of writing filled the room as Edith began to work on the documents. Quickly, she placed the files back on his desk and started to explain. Her voice was clear and well organized, making it hard to believe that she had only joined the municipal hall about 2 weeks ago. Initially, she had simply sat quietly, reviewing the files she was assigned, rarely speaking. But now, she was proficient in various affairs. Barav couldn't find any fault or mistakes in her work and told Edith to proceed as she had suggested. Watching the young woman in front of him, Barav wondered if this was the noble cultivated by the noble education back in the Duke's mansion. He felt a deep sense of threat. What if the king decided to keep her here? The king was not married yet, and she was a legitimate daughter of a duke. Just the thought of it gave Barav a headache. Barav thought of something and spoke gravely, saying they'd run into real trouble. The food reserves in the city of Neverwinter might not last until the wheat harvest. Edith immediately thought that the influx of refugees was the cause. According to the planned consumption rate, the remaining food should last until the end of summer. The spring wheat could be harvested in mid-July. As long as they stopped accepting more refugees, the food should be sufficient. Barav shook his head, stating that they couldn't stop taking in refugees. If they abandoned them, nearby cities might experience riots. Therefore, the municipal hall couldn't let the food issue disrupt the king's arrangements. They must solve this problem. It is also the duty of the chief minister, he added, pausing before looking at Edith, questioning if she had any good ideas. Barav thought that even if Edith was very skilled in political affairs, she couldn't possibly have a complete understanding of the city of Neverwinter in just half a month. Not long after, Edith responded, saying it's not that difficult. Previously, most of the northern lands weren't suitable for wheat growing, so food would be particularly scarce every spring. Therefore, the local lords would turn their attention to the eastern territories and the Kingdom of Dawn. Barav realized something. Edith spoke casually, since they can't grow or buy enough, they can only take from others. The king's army is currently attacking Dragonfall Ridge, and Count Spear's brother, in resistance to her, has rallied quite a few local nobles. Since that's the case, as long as they get rid of them, all the gold and food hiding in their basement will be theirs. Barav said, but they are still nobles. Just then he stopped mid-sentence. After the king occupied the entire territory, they would no longer be called nobles. What puzzled Barav was how quickly Edith could accept the intention of eliminating the noble class. Even though he fully supported the king's orders, Barav himself couldn't adapt as quickly as Edith, especially considering Edith was the heir of the Duke of the North. Returning to the diplomatic building, Edith pushed open the door to her room and saw Cole flipping through a book at the desk. Cole mentioned that he bought the book at the market, which was filled with interesting pictures and stories. Noticing the smile on his sister's face, something he rarely saw, Cole couldn't help but ask if they were really not going back. Edith responded that it was only temporary and that they would return once their father replied to their letters. She believed that His Majesty would allow Cole to go back. However, when Cole asked about her own plans, Edith did not hesitate to express her desire to stay. She picked up Cole's book, showing interest in Roland City Hall, stating that she could learn a lot there. Back in the north, she could have whatever she wanted just by mentioning it to their father. However, that was more about her status and her father's willingness to listen to her suggestions, limited only within their family's territory. But here, in this city hall with hardly any nobles, and where no one cared whether Edith was the daughter of a duke from the north, everyone was judged based on their work and capabilities.